Hey party people, we're going to do one of those really trendy effects today inside of Photoshop. It is one of those ones where it looks kind of like a pseudo double exposure, and we're going to make it look like this man has a city growing out of his head slash beanie. So let's get started. Now this particular picture is a nice portrait I downloaded from pexels.com. You'll find the information to it in the description down below. And I already opened it. It can be any JPEG you really want. The key here to make my life a little bit easier is I just went ahead and chose a subject against a high key backdrop, so it's really bright, has no real detail or anything that I'm aware of, and also it just kind of is a nice contrast to our subject. Now, I am going to have to do this in multiple phases in terms of I'm going to have to make a selection around his beanie, and then I'm going to actually have to get rid of the beanie to a certain extent. So the order in which we pursue that isn't that big of a deal per se, but what I'm going to do, just to kind of make my life a little bit easier, is I'm just going to create another copy of this layer so I can edit it destructively. And then we always have the original copy we can fall back on should we have to make any changes or tweaks. So to do this, I'm going to start just by doing the Control or Command J just to duplicate this original layer here and where you're going to be doing our editing on here. Now the other thing I should be aware of is I could use a tool like the clone stamp and clone out that hat, and I've actually done that before. It'll work okay, but you have to be very careful where you sample from. So for example, if I just sample from anywhere on the backdrop, say for example down here, and I paint in a lighter space, you might be able to see this on screen, you may not, but there is a subtle change of tone between the two zones. So if I kind of turn this on and off real quick, you can probably see there's like a darker smudge right there now. Let me undo that a little bit. There we go. And so it doesn't quite match up. So you have to be very meticulous in terms of where you choose your sample points from to paint over his beanie. Now, I could also use something like the, whatchamacallit? Where are you? Are you? Oh, here we go. Haha. Patch tool. The patch tool from the list. I could use the patch tool, but since the beanie's so dark against the backdrop, what's likely to happen if I try to do this and move it over is I'll probably wind up with something like this, to where it's like this really harsh smudge. And there are some methods of kind of getting around this. It's where diffusion comes in for the settings of this tool. And depending on what diffusion level we have this set to will determine what kind of blend that we get ultimately. But again, this is not something that's going to look all that great. So I've got a little secret that you can do. It will involve using the clone stamp. So I'm going to use a clone stamp here. And for my settings for the clone stamp, I'm going to use a soft brush. Just a plain round one from the top of the list, one of the soft ones, hardness at 0. I've got the size for this particular image around 250. As you can see, the relation of the size of the brush to his head is about where I'm going. The mode, normal, opacity, and flow at 100. Angle 0, and sample, since I'm actually working directly on the layer itself, I have this set to current layer. And I'll go ahead and leave this little lined option checked. It doesn't really have to be in this case because we're going to be sampling and painting once. So with this, I'm going to come over here, not right on the edge, inside a little bit. I'm going to Alt Option click to sample. And then I'm going to come on over and just click and drag to draw and start painting across his beanie here. As you can see here, I'm just cutting a channel right across. That was fun. Now, once I cut that channel going across like so, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come on over to the patch tool, and I'm just going to draw a selection that kind of cuts through this channel all the way across and goes around like that. Now, by the way, if your hands are a little, if they're not particularly steady, a little trick you can do is if you hold on your Option key on your keyboard, Alt key if you're using PC, and you click, so long as you keep that Option or Alt key down, you can just kind of click and move and click and move and click and move. And it goes in sort of like a snapping rubber band tool. But be careful, because as soon as you let go of this option now, it's going to snap back to the original point. Now, if you want to freehand it, you can still hold on your mouse button and freehand it, but as soon as you let go of the mouse button, it goes right back to snap. But now the interesting part, when I let go of the Alt or Option key, it connects itself and closes. So it's just a way you can actually navigate through tight areas if you're trying to make a selection, and you don't have to worry about like your hand being a little jittery and shifting over to an area that you didn't mean to draw this into. And we'll just go ahead and keep these nice straight lines. It makes it easier to navigate. So now they have this going through the channel and around. Watch what happens when I drag this over to the background and let go. Much, much, much better, right? It didn't smudge because since we took the time to cut that little channel, after that, the selection encompasses the entire area of the beanie that I wanted, and it's not cutting through the darker area of the beanie, trying to blend it with the brighter area of the beanie or the background, and creating that weird smudge. So it's just a little trick you can use in the future, just in case you get some bad smudging when you're trying to do selections. You may still get some weirdness around the edge here and there, and if that happens, just draw a little circle around it like so, and then just click and drag it away. And you can blend out some of the harsher portions of the backdrop or the blend that way. You may still get a little artifacting here and there. That is almost inevitable. And you can always come back with some of your other tools, like your clone stamp, whatever, to help clean some of that up if no other solution is available to you. But I think for our purposes, this is probably pretty good. So now that we've actually got rid of the main portion of the beanie, our next phase is we're going to make a selection around the original beanie using the background layer. And then we'll be able to go ahead and bring in our backdrop, our new background with the city, place it inside the area of his head, and get everything masked properly. So now that we've actually successfully taken out the beanie, our next step is we're going to create a selection around where the beanie previously was. We could have done this at the beginning, but just to show how easy it is, I'm going to go ahead and turn off this copy of the layer that we made, layer 1, and select the background. With that, I'm going to pop on over and grab my quick selection tool here. It may be buried in one of these additional slots, but make sure that quick selection tool is the one that is selected. Set it to plus up here at the top in your option bar. I've got mine set to about 10 pixels with a hardness of 100, and the angle is 0. The only other thing is make sure enhance edge is checked, and this will allow us to just kind of go in and click and drag across the beanie, and it should automatically kind of jump out and grab a good chunk of the beanie on its own. Reason why, it's high contrast from the backdrop and there's not really any other detail to get in our way. So with that set, to save the selection so we can use it later, let's go to your select menu, come on down to where it says save selection, and give it a name. I'm just going to go and call this the guy's beanie. And I'm going to press OK. And that's going to go ahead and save that for us so we can come back to it at a later time. But we don't need it just yet. So Control D or Command D to deselect. And with that set, I'm going to come on back up to layer 1 here and turn it back on. Now our next step, if you go to File, Open, I'm going to open up the architecture from today, this picture, and I want to select just the city itself. Now, it's going to be kind of difficult to go in here and kind of try to grab all the buildings and stuff individually. So let's see if we can grab the sky first, and then we'll worry about the buildings. So the same brush I had a second ago for my quick selection tool, I'm just going to come on in and just click and drag across the sky just to see what I can get. Stop there for a second, and then come over here and just click and drag to grab a little bit more. It did an okay job. It's not great. As you can see, it kind of cut off my tower, and I cut off part of the buildings here and there. It's going to take a little bit of cleanup to make this work. But also, currently the sky is selected. I want the building selected. So let's begin by making sure the buildings are ready to go, not the sky. Go ahead and go up to your select menu and choose inverse. That will make sure the buildings are selected, the sky is not. Next, I want to be able to clean up some of these buildings here. So I'm just going to grab my polygon lasso tool here and set this to add to, feathers at 0, anti-alias is checked. And the way this works is I'm just going to go and just kind of click and move just around the parts of the buildings that aren't selected. And then if it comes down here, like where it already is selected, it doesn't really matter what the selection looks like because this is all going to just become one piece when it's done. And even on the outside edge, you can go outside the edge a little bit to make sure that you get a perfect line up to this. But when I click, as you can see, it just adds the pieces I missed to my overall selection. What I don't think you should do at the moment is don't get in there and try to grab every little tiny piece of detail that you see. You can, but by the time we're done, this is going to be scaled down so small, it's going to lose any fine detail as it is. So if you're sitting there trying to like grab the little bars across the building or the little railings across the buildings, you're probably, sadly, just wasting time. It's not going to be a very visible part, the final output. Like even something like the crane here, it's so minute as it is. When I scale it down and make this really small, we're talking really small. As you can see, it's barely going to be visible. So don't stress yourself out trying to make this look perfect. Right? In fact, you'd be surprised how much stuff is just kind of done quickly inside of Photoshop and how much detail is ignored in the overall pictures most of the time. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just do the same thing with the, whatchamacallit here, the tower. Again, the finer detail up at the top probably won't be seen, but it only took me like about a fraction of a second to grab it, so whatever. Not a huge time waster there. And I'm going to add that to my selection, maybe like the tops of this building or something. Not that's going to make a huge difference on the final, but that looks pretty good. Okay. And with that said, I'm just going to go ahead and do this old school. I'm just going to copy it and paste it over the other document. I'll go to Edit Copy, or you can do Control or Command C. And I'm going to switch over to my other picture here. As you can see, my selection is currently gone, and I'm on layer 1, so I'm on the topmost layer. I'm going to Edit and Paste. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste in my buildings. Now, I do recommend that we convert this to a smart object before we scale it down to the size we need, because if I don't, well, when I finally do scale this and make this small, if for whatever reason I need to blow it up again, the quality diminishes. Now, you may not be able to see that super, super well, but it's definitely there. So please, before you start scaling things around, convert it to a smart object. You can always rasterize it later on and make it like a regular layer, but it's good for preserving detail and integrity as you kind of blow it up or shrink it down. So on this layer, I'm just going to go ahead and right click on it and choose Convert to Smart Object. All right. Now, I need to make sure this fits in the area of his head, so I'm going to use my Move tool real quick and just kind of click and drag to roughly position in place. I'll do Control or Command T to scale it down to roughly where size I want it to be. I want it to be nice and big and visible, but at the same time, I want to be able to, fit a good chunk of the buildings in his head, so maybe somewhere around there. And I'll press the Enter key. Now, just to get the buildings to be in the area where his beanie was, I'm going to go up to my Select menu and choose Load Selection. And from the channel here, I'm going to choose the guy's beanie. Now, you will say beanie selection only because I've done this project before. That was my previous selection I made, not in this video. But I'm going to choose the guy's beanie and press OK. And as you can see, it fills in that little area where his beanie was. The layer selected, I'm just going to hit the Add Layer Mask icon. And that's going to trim off everything except for the area where the beanie was. Now, I don't really care for the configuration of buildings in his beanie area at the moment. I don't really like, I really kind of like, for example, want to see the tower in there. So I can't just grab this and move it, or else this is what's going to happen. So what I suggest is if you come over to Layers panel, turn off the little chain link icon between the layer mask and the main layer. Once that's disconnected, again, don't just start moving things because you'll get some weirdness. But you can actually select the main layer, the main thumbnail here, and with my Move tool, I can reposition the buildings to whatever configuration I want. Or, if you prefer, even transform them. All right, so you can actually scale and rotate to your heart's content. But once I have the buildings in a configuration I like, whatever that might be, say for example here, and I press the Enter key, I might be looking and going this, okay, that's fine, but it kind of cuts off the tower and it cuts off part of this building. It's sort of a mess. Not a problem. Just select the layer mask at this point, grab a paintbrush. It doesn't particularly matter what kind of brush you work with, but in this case, I'm going to choose like a soft round brush, size maybe, I don't know, 200-300 pixels, somewhere around there. Arbitrary, As you can see, the size of the brush compared to like the size of his head. Mode isn't normal. The opacity and floor at 100%. And I'm just going to make sure white is in my foreground color. So now, if there's a building that's being cut off, I can come over here and just click and drag on it to paint over it. But I kind of painted over the edge outside here, and you see what happens. It kind of erases the edge of the beanie. So be careful that you really just kind of want to paint over the parts where you want to bring back buildings or structures. So in this case, I was able to bring back the tower and this building right here, and that looks pretty good. Now, the other thing is maybe I want to bring back a little bit of that beanie edge that was already there previous. So if you want to do that, just switch over to black and then just paint over the edge of his head here. As you can see, it just kind of wipes away just a little bit of the edge of the city and brings it back so you can see that tiny little bit of the beanie. If you wipe too far into the head, as you can see, it just erases the city altogether. You can always come back with a white paintbrush and just paint over that area to bring it right back. Beauty of a layer mask. What I do recommend, though, is when you're done working with your mask, always click on that blank space in between the mask and the main layer, just to ensure that the link is there. So if you scale one, the other will scale along with it properly. The only thing I need to do now is I just need to go in and convert this into a grayscale to kind of match the gentleman here. So to do that, you can do this almost any way you really want to, keeping it simple. I'm just going to use a hue saturation adjustment layer by making sure the city layer is selected, going to my adjustment layer icon here, and choosing hue saturation. And I just want to make sure it affects just the city and nothing else. So I'm going to click this little icon here, which means clip. And when I do that, you'll see hue saturation attaches itself to the city layer. Now what clip does, allow me to turn it off for a second. If clip is not enabled, so for example, by default, it's not enabled. If I did any type of adjustment, it would affect everything inside of my scene. But with clipping enabled, as you can see, it attaches itself directly to the layer underneath and will only affect the contents of that layer. So that's why clipping becomes important. So with it clipped, you always can tell because it's kind of indented, a little down arrow here. And with that set, I'm just going to go ahead and drop the saturation all the way. And maybe just kind of tweak the lightness a little bit, just so it kind of matches like the darker shades around the image. Now this is really, really basic, okay? There's nothing super fancy about it. And if you want to adjust the contrast, we can always come back to the adjustment layer icon, throw in a levels adjustment, and again, don't just start adjusting everything because it affects the whole picture. Click on the clip icon first, and then you can come in and kind of tweak the different values until you find something that kind of works best for what you're doing. Now, a couple quick little bonuses. Let's say, for example, you want to show the beanie kind of coming back through again. It's very simple to do. All you would do is select layer 1, and reduce the opacity a little bit. And that'll show the original image kind of pop through again. So as you can see, we can kind of showcase a little bit of the beanie kind of coming back again if you want to be able to show that detail. The other thing you can always do is you can always go up to the very topmost layer, go down your adjustment layer icon, and try something fun like a color lookup, for example. And with color lookup, you can look inside these little profiles here and try any one of these different variations to see if it gives your image something that might look kind of cool. So for example, maybe you try something like a late sunset. And as you can see, it puts that kind of tint all the way across, so you get a little bit of that subtle color in there. Or maybe you do something like a teal orange plus contrast, right? So it just adds that nice subtle amount of color back into the image without being too overbearing. Well, some of these are pretty overbearing, actually. But you can get a cool color effect pretty easily without putting in a ton of work. Okay? So there's our double exposure effect. I hope you had some fun with that one. Again, not true double exposure, I suppose. You'll find tons of tutorials out here on this. But it's just kind of a quick and simple way you can kind of see how some of this stuff is set up and done if you want to achieve a similar effect. All right. I will see you guys next time.